As you take on this journey to discover and understand your mastery of manifestation, and that manifestation is ultimately the art of life, you're going to have to go through a process of looking within and exploring the fact that your consciousness is divine. And when you take this journey to really go within yourself and dive deep within to evaluate, to examine, to analyze, to come to realization, to come to acceptance that you are true divinity, then you can truly understand the significance of the mastery that is your ability to manifest anything. Now, as you go through life and you think about your consciousness, really take into perspective that your consciousness is absolutely special. We often take it for granted because it's something that we have been born with. We had it from the very beginning, so we don't even understand the concept of doing without it in order for us to miss it and understand the value of it. You see, when you don't have water, then you understand the importance and the value of water. If you don't have warmth, then you understand the value of warmth. So as you go through life, you have to quite simply imagine yourself without consciousness in order to really appreciate it. And to do that, you have to look around and observe nature, observe things that don't have the ability to be self-aware, such as yourself. And that ultimately is what consciousness is, the ability to be self-aware. And as you go through life and you practice this self-awareness, it gives you power in life. It gives you insight as to what is real, what isn't real, what you can choose to be real as you go about creating your reality and creating your universe. As you go through this journey of understanding manifestation and it being your purpose, you have to analyze two major things: your consciousness and your ego. Many of us have them confused. We have them mixed up. We really can't tell the difference between the two. But as you go on this journey and you are conscious about what it is you want to establish, achieve, and understand about yourself, then those two things have to be the focus point of your learning, right? So now you have to think about your consciousness and understand that your consciousness is the part of you that will never change. It is the core of who you are. And it is also the individualized expression of God, of the universe, of the cosmos, of the galaxy, of the universe, of everything that is. And so as you really evaluate the importance of knowing that you are a fragment, a piece, an extension, because you're not separate. So even though I say fragment or a piece or individualized expression, recognize that there is still a connection there. You are still one with it. You are not separate from it. But as you go through life, you have the ability to identify with oneself, with who you are, as almost a separate being, you see. And when we go through life and we identify with this separate being so much, we lose sight of our ability to connect with a grander scheme or something bigger than ourselves. And you have to balance those two things out. And that encompasses the spiritual journey, the beginnings of a spiritual awakening. And as you come into understanding who you are, right, the core of who you are, the part of you that thinks, the part of you that is evaluating, that is wondering, that is unique and special, that is you. And then you think about the other aspects, right? The part of you that thinks, that feels, that wonders, that questions, that doubts. The part of you that is always changing, right, is more in line with ego. The part of you that remains the same is consciousness. The part of you that continues to change, continues to want to protect, want to separate, that is your ego. And remember, the ego isn't the enemy. The ego is a tool. The ego is there for a reason. You have to distinguish what that is for yourself, but I'm going to help you out along the way with understanding the significance of the ego and why, in fact, we need it in this realm. But it's more important to focus on consciousness and balancing out the ego, because when you focus on consciousness, then you have the ability to communicate and understand the ego compassionately, empathetically, and thus managing the ego, and then bringing those two things into balance. It's like the yin and yang, right? Consciousness is that pure part of you. You can say it's the yin part of you, whereas ego is more of the yang. It's more of the chaotic part of you. Now, understand as well that ego can also be looked at as almost anti-God, whereas consciousness is God. But recognize when I say anti-God, because God is still a part of that expression. You see, even though the ego identifies with edging God out or separating yourself from God or creating a separation or an identity that will often, for many people, create this division between yourself and the universe, that it is important to recognize that there is some validity, there's some ground to it doing that. But you have to recognize, though, that the ego, though its job is ultimately to separate, it is still in the realm or in the alignment with what it's supposed to do with your understanding, with your communication, with your relationship, with your spiritual journey towards understanding the grand scheme of everything in God, right? This is part of the game of life. So though the ego can be identified as anti-God, it is still God. Recognize that nothing is without God. God is everything. God is everywhere. Even the idea of the absence of God, there is still God. So as you recognize that the ego is often identified as this evil, bad thing, and yes, the ego can definitely represent Satan or the devil if it is mismanaged, you have to acknowledge that even, if you're religious and you identify with Satan, the devil, you have to acknowledge that those creations were thus still created by God, by the grander consciousness, and thus is still God. You cannot create something other than yourself. Nothing can be created other than what it is, right? Created by. So you have to understand that God is everywhere, even when it's not everywhere, okay? Ego is the same thing. It's just part of the contrast, part of the dynamic of cold versus hot, up versus down, right? Front versus the back, left versus right. It is simply an expression of how this universe works and the grand scheme of the universe. And you simply have to identify the balance and come to grips with the nature of those two things. And when you start to understand the relationship, then it already propels you so much further along your spiritual journey. And as you continue to explore this divinity, right, your divine consciousness, really come into understanding that it is your divine consciousness that is leading you, that is propelling you, that is inspiring you, that is giving you the ideas, giving you the thoughts and the inspiration to actually move forward in life with ideas on what to create. So recognize that nothing that you imagine, nothing that you visualize or envision or inspired with is out of your reach, because that is your consciousness, that is the God within you that is communicating to you to take action on something. And if you have the ability to have that inspiration in the first place, or that idea in the first place, then that means you have the capability to materialize it and make it so. So recognize that there is nothing out of your realm of creation when you have the thought or the idea to do it. Many times when the ego is mismanaged, that is when people let the ego separate themselves from the grand scheme of what it is that is possible, what it is that is within their potential or within their ability to create. within their talents to create, within their purpose to create. So as the consciousness can communicate and say, boom, here's an idea, and you may be inspired by it, you may be motivated by it, you may be excited by it, but then the ego will come in if it's mismanaged, right? It'll come in and it'll throw in doubt. It'll say, well, this is hard. Well, no one's ever done this before. Well, how can I make money from it? Can I pay my bills? Will people respect me for it? And then slowly the ego will take away your ability to actually think through and make it happen, right? So you have to balance those two things. And it is through exploring your divinity, exploring your consciousness, through you really understand how powerful you are, how amazing you are. But you have to balance out the ego and make sure that the ego is in check and is in alignment with what it is that your consciousness is telling you to do. Thank you so much, and continue to join me on this journey. Peace and abundance always.